As we open our Bibles to Exodus chapter 20, and we're looking at verses 8 through 11. As you can see on the screen, it's remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. This is the fourth commandment. And we might say to ourselves, well, what is the Sabbath and what's it got to do with me? I'm free from the law and I live under grace, and so this doesn't apply to me anymore. Is that true? I'm free to do whatever I want, and you can't tell me otherwise. Am I under law or grace? Okay, so this applied to Israel and not to me, right? Oh. There's so much confusion and misunderstanding about what the Sabbath is and how it relates to us as believers today. Now, the fourth commandment, well, it was going to be there, but it's disappeared somehow. We have gremlins in the system, but you'll see it when it comes up. The fourth commandment is keep the Sabbath. And this is a guy that's wondering, but it is that's something that we need to do. The first thing we need to understand is what the word Sabbath actually means. The word Sabbath does not refer to a day. It means to cease from labour. That's what Sabbath means, to cease from labour. And as you see the slide on the board there, in Mark chapter 2, verses 23 to 28, Jesus was going through the grain fields on a Sabbath, and his disciples began to pick some heads of wheat as they made their way. So the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is against the law on the Sabbath?" He said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need, and he and his companions were hungry, how he entered the house of God when Abiathar was high priest and ate the sacred bread, which is against the law for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to his companions? Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. For this reason the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." So what Jesus is doing here is reinforcing the fact the Sabbath was never meant to be a burden for people. By that, with following rules and regulations that restricted them from what they could and couldn't do. It was meant to be something that people would enjoy. He also stated he was Lord of the Sabbath, meaning he was sovereign over the Sabbath, and that means if he's sovereign over the Sabbath, he could do whatever he wanted. It didn't control him. It didn't restrict him in any way, shape or form. But we're going to look now at the Sabbath, the hows and whys of it. The principle is to remember the Sabbath day, to set it apart as holy. Now, as we look at the Ten Commandments, we see that all of them have a permanency about them. But when it comes to the fourth commandment, we often will ask ourselves, is this permanent as well? Is it something that should be consistent and stay for us to observe? Should we be observing the Sabbath as a Saturday, as the Jewish people did and have? Or do we replace that day with Sunday and call it the Sabbath day? What do you reckon? Well, that helps a lot. Should we keep it a Saturday or should we change it to Sunday? Okay. Well, let's have a look to better understand what the Sabbath is and what it was meant to be. And to do that, we need to go back to Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, where we read, "The heavens and the earth were completed with everything that was in them. By the seventh day, God finished the work that he had been doing. He ceased on the seventh day all the work that he had been doing. God blessed the seventh day, made it holy, because on it he ceased all the work that had been doing in creation. Now, who made the seventh day holy? Did man make the seventh day holy? No, God did. God made the seventh day holy. So what he does, he separates this day from all the other days. He makes it a special day, and he does so for the following reasons. The first reason, because all the work of creation was completed. It was done and dusted, if you like, in 6 24-hour days. There's no more work for him to do. He's created everything. Now, creation ceased on which day? On the sixth day. On the sixth day. It didn't go on for millions and billions of years. 6 days, it was completed, and this was to be a special day. Now, what did God then do? We're told from our scriptures, he rested from all his work, from all the things he'd created. So we're told God stops and rests. Why? Is it because he's tired and weary and worn out from all his work and needs a day off? Does God get tired? Does God get weary? You see, the scriptures says in Isaiah 40:28, surely you know, surely you have heard, the Lord is the God who lives forever, who created all the world. He does not become tired or need to rest. No one can understand how great his wisdom is. So God doesn't get tired. He doesn't get weary. So he doesn't need a rest. So what does it mean he rested? And it's very simple if we just look at the text. He ceased from his work. He wasn't there just to recharge his batteries. He rested because he was satisfied or pleased with everything that he had done. In Genesis 1:31, God says when he saw all that he made, he saw it was very good. There was evening and there was morning the sixth day. So God was totally satisfied with everything he had done. There's no more work for him to do for a little while. Now I say for a little while. At least until Genesis 3. In Genesis 3, we have Adam and Eve fell into sin, and he provided them with clothes. In other words, God worked to provide them with clothes. In Genesis 3:21-24, you can look it up. The Lord God made clothes from animal skins for the man and his wife and dressed them. Then the Lord said to them, humans have become like one of us. They know good and evil. We must keep them from eating some of the fruit from the tree of life, or they will live forever. So the Lord forced Adam out of the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. After God forced humans out of the garden, he placed angels and a sword of fire that flashed around in every direction on its eastern border. This kept people from getting to the tree of life. So God ceased his work from the end of creation until the fall of man, where he began his work to redeem his creation from sin. Now, when you examine Genesis 2-3, you'll notice there's nothing said about a day of rest for Adam. Adam wasn't told, look, Adam, on the seventh day, you've got to rest, mate. You've got to have a day off. Why not? Why wasn't Adam commanded to have a day off? Well, our text lets us know Adam was created perfect. He had no sin. He didn't get tired. He didn't get weary. He was living the dream, if you like, in paradise. No labor, no sweat. Life was a dream. He had no reason to rest. No special day of worship that he is commanded to observe. This day is for God. It was the day he completed his creation. He was satisfied with it. It was designated as a special memorial to creation and its perfection. That's the origin of the Sabbath. God created it. You see, he's giving it to us to remember that he was satisfied with everything he's done. Now, this day was chosen to be remembered above all the other days as a reminder of God's perfection in creation. Saturday, if you like, was to be a day to enjoy the creation. It was a perpetual witness to God as a creator. Sunday is to be the perpetual witness to God as our Redeemer. Here in Genesis, there is no mention of the Sabbath as a law to be observed. Neither does it say that the Sabbath is a day of worship. Now, it's interesting to observe that from the time of creation until the time of Moses at Mount Sinai, with all the patriarchs in between, Abraham, Isaac, and Joseph, and so on, none of them worshipped on a designated day that was given to them. It was never commanded for them to do so. In the book of Genesis, there was no command given for man to observe and keep the Sabbath day. What we find is that here in Exodus, it is officially instituted in the law of Moses. This is when it's given. Here in chapter 31 of Exodus 12 to 17, it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Tell the Israelites, you must keep the rules about my Sabbaths, because they will be a sign between you and me from now on. In this way you will know that I, the Lord, make you holy. Make the Sabbath a holy day. If anyone treats the Sabbath like any other day, that person must be put to death. Anyone who works on the Sabbath day must be cut off from his people. There are 6 days for working, but the seventh is a day of rest, a day holy for the Lord. Anyone who works during the Sabbath day must be put to death. The Israelites must remember the Sabbath day as an agreement between them and me that will continue from now on. The Sabbath day will be a sign between me and the Israelites forever, because in 6 days I, the Lord, made the sky and earth. On the seventh day I didn't work, I rested." So what do we have here in this text? Here it is given as a sign. It's an agreement between God and Israel. It's to be a perpetual agreement. In other words, it continues on from generation to generation to remind them of creation. Now, why and what is that sign? To remind them of what could have been. To remind them that mankind had forfeited paradise, if you like, because of his sin. Remember, God created everything, and behold, it was very good. God was satisfied. And then you'll notice in the creation account that Adam and Eve were told, or Adam was told, not to partake of the fruit, of a certain fruit. Everything else was free to do. And we know the serpent came along, he tempted Eve. Eve partook of it, and then she got a husband to, here it is, and he partook. And from that point on, what we find is that Adam paid the price for sin. Adam was held accountable because he knew exactly what he was doing. But God punished them. He provided them with animal skins. In other words, an animal had to pay the price for what Adam had done. And then they were removed from the garden. And before that, it was paradise. Man didn't have to work. He had a relationship with God and fellowship with him. It was perfect. Now, it's a reminder to them of what could have been. But now, by instituting the law, it required obedience through a relationship with God. They would be blessed if they observed the right behavior of what might have been. And it also pointed them to a future kingdom where, if you like, Eden would be restored once again. The Sabbath day was a reminder to them that when they rested, they remembered a perfect creation. A perfect creation which was dominated by God's goodness and righteousness, which had been lost because of sin and can only be regained by righteousness. They were to consider the importance on that seventh day of examining their own lives, of looking and measuring up against the law of God, recognizing sin was the objective in bringing them to repentance. So the first seventh day identified God as a creator, but the institution of the Sabbath under Moses identifies God as being the lawgiver. In the beginning, the Sabbath was to produce gratitude for the wonder of creation. Then it was given to produce repentance for the forfeiture of all that is right. So things changed. The Sabbath day now took on a new meaning. It's still a reminder that God created, but it's a reminder that the creation of God, which was perfect, is now marred and stained by sin. Something happened, and now it's changed. There is not one New Testament command given to keep the Sabbath. All the others are repeated, but the fourth commandment is never quoted in the New Testament. You'll not find any instructions about what you can or cannot do regarding the Sabbath in the New Testament. Looking through the New Testament church history, in Acts 15, the Jerusalem Council never required Gentile believers to observe the Sabbath. They never disciplined them for failing to keep the Sabbath. They never warned believers concerning Sabbath violations. Now, we as Christians today recognize the purpose of the Sabbath in the beginning. It's to remind us of the greatness and goodness of our Creator and what He's done. We celebrate God as being our Redeemer on the first day of the week, Sunday. We never celebrate it as the Jewish people did under Moses, because under the law, it brought death. The law brought death. So how do you remember the Sabbath? By keeping it holy. Cease from all your work and remember the Creator and what He's done. Now, God gave mankind the Sabbath. Why? Because we needed it. We still need it today. We need to rest from our labors. We need to cease from our everyday activity and rest in His goodness, mercy, and love. It's to be a day of rest. Now, we need to understand that the pagan cultures around Israel all observed a Sabbath, because all the religious observance were based on the sun and moon, which were worshipped as gods. And so the cycles of the sun and moon determined the religious practices that were required by these pagan cults. They observed a special day to their God. Only Israel, as a nation, was given a 7-day week, if you like, to worship and remember that it was God who gave them this day as their Creator, who was sovereign both over the sun and the moon. Does this apply to me as a Christian today? Do I have a day in which I am to worship the living God? The answer is? You don't seem very sure, but unequivocally, yes. But it's not called the Sabbath day. It's called the Lord's Day. It's the first day of the week, which was understood by the Christians who gathered to worship on that day. There's a practical reminder. For 6 days you may labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, or your cattle, or your resident foreigner who is in your gates. Practical reminder. Here we're given the explanation as to why we're to observe the Sabbath. The first thing to notice is it's the Lord's day. It belongs to Him because of what He did on that day. The second thing is to notice there is to be a cessation of work on that day. You have 6 other days to work. You need one day to rest. There's to be a balance in life. We work and we are to worship. Now, God himself worked for 6 days in creating the world. The 7th day he rested from his activities of creation because it was finished. In God's order of creation, one day is to be set aside because God knows we needed one day off from work. Mankind was never created to work 7 days a week without a rest. If you continue to do so, you'll suffer for it. Your body will let you know. Your mind will let you know. Things will start happening to you physically, mentally, and emotionally if all you do is work, work, work. Our bodies were created that we needed one day of rest, a cessation of work. Now, this was not to be just a benefit for individuals. It was also to be a benefit for all of society. And you'll notice that the benefit for families, for servants, for animals, for foreigners. There are 7 categories of people that will benefit by having this Sabbath day. So the Sabbath rest originally is to be remembered as a gift, a blessing, not to be a burden. Remember who God is speaking to here in Exodus 20 when he gives these commands. Now, who was he speaking to? He's speaking to a people who had become his people. What had they known all their lives? They only knew how to be slaves. For 400 years, they belonged to somebody else. Now, as a slave, do you have your own rights and privileges? Can you decide, oh, I'm not going to work today, I think I'll just have a day off? How would that work with your master? You would be flogged. Think about it. These people couldn't determine when they worked, and they couldn't determine when they had a rest. Other people ruled over them. Other people demanded their work, all sorts of hours to produce something that they themselves wouldn't directly benefit from. What they would have to do through their blood, sweat and tears was to produce something for others. So this is the background from which these people had come. And here is God saying to them, all of this is going to change. All you've known as slaves is to do what other people tell you. Now, you will have a day of rest, my people, and you'll remember me and remember what I've done for you. Why? Because now you're in a personal relationship with me. I am your God and you are my people. So things are going to change. Think about it. 400 years, all you've known has been told what to do, how to do it, and why you should do it. And all of a sudden you're free. You've got these news that says you're going to have a day of rest. No more work. A day off. What would that have done for you as a slave? It would have been hard to get this old grey matter thinking about it when that's all you've known all your life. You didn't know whether to cry with tears of joy or tears of confusion. What am I going to do now? It had repercussions on everyone in society. It was to be a day of blessing to people who had known only work. Now we know that man decided that they could improve on what God had decreed. So the Sabbath day became a burden because of the regulations and restrictions that became associated with it through the impositions made by the religious authorities attached to observing it. And we have a very clear one here that we're looking at. This is what God designated. It was to be a day of blessing. But the Pharisees implemented something like 1,520 odd additions or subclauses to the Sabbath. Now, let's just say a flea got on your arm during, or a fly, if you like, on the Sabbath day. Guess what? If you went whack, you had broken the Sabbath, according to the Pharisees. Why? You did work. You worked. You killed the fly. You're not allowed to do anything on the Sabbath day. You killed the fly. You worked. You violated the Sabbath. It became a burden. So the people were watching the rules and regulations of what they could and couldn't do. Now here we go to what I call the problem of the Sabbath revealed. Now there's been so much debate among people about the Sabbath day and whether it's something that Christians we should or shouldn't keep. The main arguments that I can see that are presented are that the Roman Emperor Constantine changed the day from Saturday to Sunday. It's commonly presented by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Is there any evidence to suggest that is true? Did he change the Saturday to the Sunday, as has been said? Is it a valid claim? Now let me just say, if you go on Dr. Google, you'll be more confused, because they will give you quotes about how different parts of the Catholic writings may claim that, yes, we were responsible for doing that. But it's not backed by evidence. Let me explain. Constantine reigned from 306 to 337 AD. So there should be enough evidence of that time to find out whether Christians worship on the Sabbath day, the Saturday, prior to Constantine beginning his reign, and there should be enough evidence to justify the claim that after his decree that the Sabbath day was officially done on a Sunday. There should be enough evidence. The reality from historic evidence is that the argument that Constantine changed that day is not supported by history, and it fails to stand up to scrutiny when it's thoroughly examined. I don't mean just a cursory over the top. I mean look at it, examine it. Evidence supports the practice of the early Christians who were worshipping on the first day of the week and not the seventh day, long before Constantine came to power and issued such a decree. Church history, Schaeff's church history, actually says that in 30 AD, the Christians were not allowed to worship in synagogues. They were kicked out. And from the time of AD 60, they were worshipping on the Sunday. AD 60. This is when Christians began, if you like, voluntary on their own time to worship on the Sunday, not the Saturday. So there's more than enough evidence to suggest that Christians were worshipping on the first day of the week long before Constantine came into power. But I want to put up this slide. This is what actually Constantine decreed. On March the 7th, 321 AD, Constantine issued this decree: on the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and people residing in cities rest, let all the workshops be closed. In the country, however, persons engaged in agriculture may freely and lawfully continue their pursuits. Now, I want you to look at that. Can you tell me, in this decree, is it actually changing the day of worship? Or what is he actually saying? So, is he changing the day? No, what he's doing is, he's not mentioning anything regarding the activities of the church. As someone has said, it's the first Blue Sunday law or Sunday closure law. Now, the only time that if you like, Seventh-day Adventists would think that this dealt with worship is because the Jewish Sabbath day was celebrated by resting. That's all. But this decree is not changing it from a Saturday to a Sunday. He's just saying all work will cease. That's all he made. Now why? Because the practice of changing the day of worship was already happening. It was happening, so he didn't have to make an edict changing it. It was already being observed prior to 150 years before to this present time. They were worshipping on the first day of the week. Now as Christians, we do not worship by resting because our rest comes later. Our rest is in the person of Jesus Christ. And there's a day when we will cease from all our labours and will be in the presence of the Lord. We'll rest from all our labours. Now you'll notice in Constantine's decree, it only applied to city dwellers. Farmers were exempted from this law. Now, another argument presented by the same group claims the Roman Catholic Church was behind the change of the Sabbath day to Sunday. They go back to the Council of Nicaea, who they believe held a meeting encouraged by Constantine to change the Sabbath day, when in fact it had nothing to do with the changing of the day, the Sabbath to the Sunday. This is already happening. What that meeting discussed was when the time of the celebration of the Passover would happen. Now that's fact, but you can see how the waters get muddied if you don't bother to look at it properly. Now there's plenty of material there. I'm not going to bore you with all that. I could go through and give you all the proofs and evidence. But in her book, The Cosmic Conflict, has anyone read it? I haven't, because it was published in 1844, long before I was born. But in 1844, the Seventh-day Adventist prophetess Ellen White argues that the early Christian church became apostate at the time of the decree of Constantine. That has been challenged and debunked by their own leading theologians. The change in worship days began around the AD 60 in Rome, but was not generally accepted until after the decree of Hadrian in 135. So all I'm saying is enough evidence, if you really want to look at it, that you can debunk that statement. But that's the primary statement of keeping the Sabbath to that Saturday. If we look at Exodus 31, 12 to 17, which we did, it reminds us the Sabbath law was for Israel. It was a sign of the covenant between God and Israel. No one ever changed the Sabbath day to Sunday. The Sabbath commemorated a finished creation with rest. The first day commemorates a finished redemption and a new work, a new covenant that was done through Jesus Christ. The Sabbath day commemorates Israel's deliverance from Egyptian slavery and God resting on the seventh day. The first day commemorates Christ's resurrection, his victory over death, victory over eternal punishment for man. It gives hope that all who believe will be resurrected from the dead. The Sabbath is a day of rest and quiet, the first day of the week of worship and praise. Sabbath means rest, not Saturday. There were other Sabbath rest days given to Israel, so it cannot just mean only on the seventh day. The Sabbath was made for man to rest, and God was telling Israel to keep the rest. Their focus was not a day. The day was the rest took place, was made into something more by the religious leaders of the time. Now, the proposed rationale we have, and on the seventh day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made, and blessed the seventh day, sanctified it, because in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. Now, why should I observe a day of rest? Why should I cease from my labour? What's the point? What's the rationale for it? Well, God himself says, I worked 6 days and I had 1 day off. If it's good enough for me, then it's good enough for you. Now, why do I say that? Because as human beings, we are made in the likeness and image of God. If it was good enough for God, it's good enough for us. We're made in his image. Israel was commanded to keep the day because of creation established by God. He designated it as a rest day. And as human beings, we should follow the same example. God made that day holy. This is something we are to do. God rested for us, we rest for him. God redeemed us, we should remember it on his day. A Christian observance of the Lord's Day will always involve contemplating what God has done in creation, what God has done in redemption, what Jesus did in his resurrection, and we'll look forward to the day to come. So the Christian church is to celebrate the Lord's Day. The New Testament church practice was to meet on the first day of the week, which is Sunday. Jesus was raised on the first day of the week. A week later, he met with his disciples on, guess what? The first day of the week. A Sunday, not Saturday. Examine the passages in the New Testament, you'll find there is more than enough evidence to show that the early church met on the first day of the week, Sunday, and they called it the Lord's Day, not the Sabbath. Now let me just say that Jesus and the apostles did observe the Sabbath when it fell. They did go to the synagogues. They did worship in there on these days. But they also worship on the Lord's Day. Now, it makes sense when we observe 1 day of the week is to be different from every other day. Why? Because we were not designed and made to work 7 days a week without suffering the consequences. Now, I know that many of you, as I look out, some of you are older than I am. Some are around the same vintage, some are a lot younger. But there are those who wasn't that long ago. We grew up in an era where strict rules were imposed on a Sunday. Can you remember them? What were you allowed to do on Sundays, say in the 60s? Now it seems far removed, but no sports were played on Sunday. There were no shopping centres that were open to trade, except maybe some local shops. There were no clubs, no cinemas, there were no pubs open, no television, no newspapers. You couldn't go to the hardware and get a part you needed. You had to wait until Monday. Now, that's about it. You could do nothing. Nothing. So what did you do on Sunday? Well, in those days, people did go to church. But was it out of a sense that they wanted to, or because it was imposed upon them? Well, I mean, you couldn't do anything else, could you? But as a result, it's interesting. If you grew up in that era, and some of you have, there are some who struggle with the sense of guilt that I shouldn't be going to the shop on Sunday. I shouldn't be going here. I shouldn't be doing this. Why? They grew up in a time where it's not allowed. And so there's that sense of guiltiness because it was done on the Lord's day. And as such, you respected that day. So you didn't do it. Let me say, Sunday is not the Sabbath. Sunday is not the Sabbath. The early Christians worshipped on Sunday to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Most of the Sunday taboos which we had were based on tradition, not on the Bible. The New Testament says nothing about what you should or shouldn't do on Sunday. Nothing. In Jesus' day, the rabbis made up 1,521 things you couldn't do on the Sabbath. But there are no absolute directions given in the New Testament about how Christians are to observe Sunday. None. And so therein lies the difference between the Sabbath and the Sunday. Under the law, you had all these restrictions. Under Sunday, you've got this grace. The Sabbath was given as a matter of law. Sunday is a day of grace. The Sabbath remembers creation. Sunday celebrates recreation. The Sabbath was a social force for a nation. Sunday is an individual day given to each Christian to celebrate as they see fit. The Sabbath was governed by rules and regulation. Sunday has no rules whatsoever. Therefore, the challenge: how does all this relate to me as a Christian today about how I am to observe the Lord's Day? And I am to observe the Lord's Day. The difficulty is, you and I and our society, we try to cram as much time as we can into our rest days. Our culture demands that we work long and hard, and often this includes working 6 days a week. This in turn makes it harder for us to set one day aside for the Lord when you and I have so many demands on our time. We do want to recharge our batteries. We do want to make a time with our families. We do also want to have me time. And we also want to honour the Lord by recognising this day as being different from all the others that needs to be given to Him. So there's a whole raft of things that need to be considered. How do I do this? How do I take all this time and everything I'm doing and honour the Lord on a specific day? Well, let's think about the way we worship. What do we think of it being the Lord's Day? Is it the Lord's Day? Or has it become just like the other days, where we play catch-up and work to get things done that we've neglected to do in our busy lives? And that's often what Saturday and Sunday, particularly Sunday, is. It's a catch-up day. It's a day that I've got today off. This is the only day. I've worked 6 days, but this is the only day off. So I've got to do everything on this day. Am I spending time with God's people at the beginning and ending of the day? We say it's the Lord's Day. We're instructed to meet together, to fellowship in His name. Do I enjoy and love the time of fellowship? Or do I see gathering together with God's people as more of a burden and not a blessing? Well, that's for individuals to decide. But our actions speak louder than words. We can say, oh, it's a blessing, but hey, don't ask me to come to church twice. I've already done my time once. I've got things to do, places to go, people to see. I've already given my time to the Lord. He's had 2 hours on Sunday. That's all I can spare Him. And we feel we've done our duty to observing the Lord's Day. Now, I can remember when Sunday meant going to church. And I can remember we're involved all day. I like David Jeremiah. I was drugged to church 3 days a week, or 3 times on a Sunday. And I can remember those days, particularly when your parents are heavily involved in ministry, being drugged to church. Every opportunity, bang, that was it. You had no say in the matter. It was done. But you know, I can also remember, and there are some here, in the country areas. They travelled far and wide. They walked. They travelled by horse and cart. But they made Sunday a day of worshipping the Lord. They gathered together. They attended church. They bought lunch. They fellowshiped together. Then they had another service in the afternoon before the families headed back home. And guess what they did? They milked the cows. They fed the pigs and the chooks. But they spent majority of the day worshipping and fellowshipping together. They didn't come just for an hour. They came prepared. They had to walk for hours just to get there. But they came, and they didn't just want just an hour's service with a half-hour message. No, they wanted fellowship. That was what it was all about. It was the Lord's day. Today, we're under immense pressure to make it our day and not His day. And the danger is that we become resentful. We don't want to waste it. We want to do things that we feel are more important. And often that means they're more important than going to church and worshipping with God and being with His people. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do any work at all. We live in a society today where the working week has changed. It used to be that Monday to Friday was it, and you had Saturday and Sunday. But that's changed. People work rotating shifts. People have to work to survive. And they don't have the days off on the weekend. They've been rostered onto work. And so they have days off during the week that everybody else is at work, and they've been given those days off. Then there are those people who are necessary to do legitimate activities. Doctors, nurses, firemen, paramedics, policemen, all are required to work on the Lord's day. People don't stop dying. People don't stop having crashes simply because it's the Lord's day. So there's essential services where these people must work. But I wonder, though, how many of us who say, yes, it's the Lord's day, I want to worship Him, and we have been impacted by our society. Many of us, because we're lazy and we've left things to do on Sunday rather than do them when we had time during the week. What that requires is discipline and organisation to do a little bit extra to make sure that Sunday comes, we're being prepared for Sunday as a day of worship. The pressure to use the day for ourselves and our pleasure is immense. And I'm not arguing that fact. The pressure today is immense. Kids' sports are often played on Sunday, and there's a pressure to get them from one place to another, to stay and watch and take them home, and it usually coincides with the times that churches are on. As one commentator makes this observation, once your schedule belongs to somebody else, you're back in slavery again, and you do not experience the freedom of the Lord's day. The reality is, this is what's happening in our culture and society today. We're slave to somebody else's timetables and desires. The Lord's day is a blessing, and when we forfeit it, it will be to our detriment, because you don't break the Sabbath will break you. In other words, the day of rest, you don't have one, it'll break you because you fail to have one. History has shown that when we do not have the Sabbath rest the way that God intended, He will take it away from you. That will be His punishment. He'll say, you don't want the Sabbath, you don't want to observe it, then I'll take it away from you and you'll suffer because of it. The principle of the Sabbath rest, it still applies to us as Christians today. The question is, how am I going to use the Lord's day as a day that is separate, as a day, as He reflected, that honours Him? A challenging question. It still applies to us today.